All right.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to our first event at Kaleidoscope. So, after founding Early Circle, this has been a dream of mine for some time, providing the same type of education we provide in mathematics at Early Circle, but in other subjects. So at Kaleidoscope, we're planning to offer a range of classes for advanced pre-collegiate students in a wide range of areas, providing them with classes that are as challenging as they're able to handle, giving them the tools needed to become top professionals in their chosen areas. So that's one of my goals for Kaleidoscope. But another thing that I would like Kaleidoscope to become is an intellectual forum where people with interesting ideas can share and discuss them with eager students. And I hope this talk will be the first of many events of this type. So with that, I'd like to welcome Jason Crawford, founder of the Roots of Progress Institute. And he will tell us about the future of humanity and how you can help. Go ahead.
Great. Thank you so much for having me. Great to be here and great to see all of you. Just before the chat, I was talking about how in high school, so I actually went to a magnet high school for math, science, and computers, and I wanted to learn even more math and computers than I was, getting in the class or faster. And long story short, I ended up dropping out of high school like halfway through in order to pursue a self-study program for the last like 2 years. I did after that then get back onto sort of the normal, standard traditional legible path. I went to college. I went to Carnegie Mellon University. I got a degree in computer science, and then I was in the tech industry for many years doing software and startups before I decided to go full time on what is now known as progress studies and read and write and talk about progress. But yeah, so that's my background. I love tech just like you guys do. And yeah, I wanted to share some thoughts about progress in the future. Now, we hear a lot, you probably hear a lot about disaster scenarios for the future. Things like climate change destroying the earth, maybe another pandemic coming along that's even worse than COVID, nuclear war, AI going rogue and taking over and killing everybody. There's all kinds of things that could do massive damage or cause human extinction. Um, and some of your peers, many of your peers actually agree with the statement when asked on a survey that, quote, humanity is doomed. Just from climate change alone, let alone all those other things, more than half of 16 to 25-year-olds around the world in this poll agreed with that statement. I don't know how you feel about it, um, but I am here with a message, and because I think you might be wondering how can one do good in a world that is so hopeless, and why bother trying if the world is just going to end in our lifetimes anyway. So I'm here with a message, which is that I think humanity is not doomed. And when I say this, it's not because I don't think the problems are real. Uh, Climate change, pandemics, risk from new technology, all of these problems are very real. So I'm not ignoring them, and it's also not because I think these problems will necessarily be easy to solve. Rather, it's because I believe that humanity can solve hard problems. And so I believe that we are up to the challenge. And so I want to talk about here is why, and I'm going to give some a historical argument and a sort of theoretical argument. And then I want to talk about what the future looks like, what kinds of problems are out there to be solved, and how you can help. So the main reason that I believe that humanity is excellent at solving problems is because I know history and I know how many amazingly difficult and important problems we have already solved for ourselves to a large degree. Problems like feeding ourselves, getting enough to eat, constructing shelter that's durable and comfortable, getting around the planet, keeping ourselves safe from disease. Um, we live in a pretty amazing world compared to the way that people lived historically for thousands and thousands of years. Our quality of life today in 2025 is actually pretty incredible. And yet we take it all for granted because we didn't live through all of the centuries when life was very difficult. And we don't always even know the history. So we just sort of like, we're kind of like fish in water We're surrounded by technology and industry and industrial civilization. We're so surrounded by it. We have been all our lives that we just kind of don't know that there's anything else. And technology and industry have solved so many of the problems of daily living so thoroughly that the problems themselves have vanished. We don't see manure in city streets that were left, by the horses that used to run our streets before we had automobiles. We don't see epidemics of disease that sweep through our cities the way they used to in previous centuries. Um, we take this stuff for granted, and they don't really teach you this in school. The history of technology, the history of industry is not a standard subject on any curriculum. If you get any of it, you're in a kind of a rare, lucky position. I didn't really learn this stuff until I started studying it on my own as an adult. But I think this perspective is crucial to have for a number of reasons. One, just most fundamentally, to appreciate the fact that you, all of us, have inherited a gift, that our quality of life, our standard of living is an amazing gift we've inherited from previous generations. And to have some gratitude to those who came before us, and whose work created the modern world. And second, to be able to see this perspective on history, to see history as an upward trajectory, to see history as a story of progress, so that we can appreciate that progress might continue into the future and that we might even be a part of it. So I want to start by just reviewing a few of the greatest achievements in human history. We're only going to have, a brief amount of time for this, but I think it's very important to have this perspective. So let's just, look at a few of them and see how far we've come. So I'm going to look at three grand challenges. And the first one is feeding ourselves. For most of history, most people were farmers working in the fields. They had to be. The reason is that at the time, with the tools and the technology available, farming was not very productive, meaning a given farmer on a plot of land just could not grow very much food relative to today's standards. And this meant an entire farm family working together could grow enough food to feed themselves and maybe about one other family at most. The implication, if this is true, is that half of the population has to be farmers, just in order to make enough food to feed the other half. Even though so many people were working in farming and agriculture, famine was still common. It was common to run out of food, and famine recurs over and over and over again throughout recorded history in basically every agricultural civilization. Why was farming so difficult? Why was it such a big challenge? I'm going to go through two big problems and how we solved them. The first big problem in farming is soil fertility. Now, the basic problem here is that even if you find a really good plot of land where crops grow really well, it never lasts. You plant one harvest, it's really good. You plant another, it's not quite as good. If you keep planting crops in the same field season after season, every time you'll reap a little bit less. The crops won't grow quite as high, quite as strong. You won't grow quite as much food. The more harvests you reap, the smaller each one gets. There's something in the soil that gets depleted. The ancient people used to think that, okay, the field gets tired somehow and needs to rest. Now, the earliest agriculturalists had a very simple solution. When your field gets exhausted, you just move on. You just find another field. And this is the way they would go. They would use up one plot in a year or two, then they would move to another plot of land, and they would keep moving and moving. They would finally, maybe come back to the original plot of land after 10, 20, 30 years or more. So a very long time. And the problem with this, of course, is that you need a whole lot of land in order to be able to do this, because most of your land at any time is sitting idle, just kind of regrowing and rebuilding its fertility. Eventually, population density was so much that people couldn't do that anymore, so they had to come up with better methods. Now, a more advanced method that was used in ancient and medieval times is to have, say, 2 or 3 fields and to plant them in a rotation. And in this rotation, you would have one field fallow at any time. Fallow meaning you're not growing any crops on it. It's just resting and rebuilding its fertility. Again, it's not very productive, right? You've got a whole field that's doing nothing but just kind of sitting there and regrowing fertility. But that was how they did it in a 2 or 3 field rotation. The other thing they did was they had a lot of livestock, animals, and they collected all the manure, and then they would put the manure in the field, and manure acted as fertilizer. So there was a lot of shoveling manure and having the livestock go around and maybe just deposit their manure on the fallow field. There were different ways to do it. But this was farming for thousands of years. So how did we ever do? And it was still, again, very unproductive. Still, like half of people or more had to be farmers. So how did we ever improve? Well, eventually, by the 17 and 1800s, scientists who were researching the nature of plants and how they grow figured out plant chemistry. Figured out that plants are mostly made of the atoms carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, and nitrogen. And they started to figure out, where do they get those atoms from in order to grow? Where do the elements come from? Carbon they get from the air, from carbon dioxide. Hydrogen they can get from water. You probably know as H2O. Oxygen they can get from both places, but nitrogen they can only get by absorbing it from the soil. And so nitrogen was a key ingredient in fertilizer, in what was making the soil fertile. And it turned out to be, a lot of it was the nitrogen that was getting used up. And that's why the field would lose its fertility. So you needed to keep adding back nitrogen to the soil through nitrogen fertilizers. Well, at first we used natural fertilizers. Including one of the biggest sources was basically seabird droppings. So there were these islands off the coast of Peru where literally birds had been pooping for like who knows how many hundreds or thousands of years, until it had stacked in mountains, like, well, in huge deposits like 20 or 30 feet tall. You can see in this illustration that there's a mountain of guano, bigger, taller than a ship. And they would literally go to these islands and mine it like it was a natural resource, which it was. And they would put it in bags and then ship it all over the world as fertilizer. But very quickly, the fertilizer ran out. They used it all up. The islands were exhausted. What rescued agriculture and rescued humanity, really, and enabled us to keep growing food, was the creation of synthetic fertilizer, industrial chemical processes that basically made fertilizer out of water and air. These processes take water and air as their inputs, and take the nitrogen and the hydrogen and synthesize ammonia, which is NH3, a compound of nitrogen and hydrogen, and then that can be turned into fertilizer. And this was invented in Germany in the early 1900s. So synthetic fertilizer now powers something like half of agriculture. The second big problem is that farming is just a whole lot of backbreaking manual labor. There's just so many things you have to do. Tilling the soil, like plowing it or digging it, or just kind of turning it over and getting it ready to plant the seeds, actually planting the seeds, taking out the weeds that are competing with your crops for nutrients, then reaping the harvest when it's ready. And then a lot of crops need some post-processing. So like wheat, for instance, the grain comes in these little kernels that they're hard kernels that need to be broken open. This is called threshing. You can see here, people used to do it by basically just putting the wheat on the ground and beating it with sticks. This was one threshing process, and it was super hard work. You can see some two farm workers doing it here. It wasn't until almost 1800 that anybody invented a machine that could do this threshing process for you by putting the wheat through some rollers, and then kind of setting up the rollers and the teeth to sort of hit the wheat in just the right way to break open the casing and get the grain. Reaping was even a bigger problem because it all had to be done in about a span of 1 week when the wheat was ripe before it went bad in the field. Used to be done with a sickle, which is that little curved blade you hold in your hand, or a scythe, which is the really big blade that's on a long handle. Very difficult manual work. Sounds like somebody needs to mute. Thank you. It wasn't until, again, the mid 1800s that someone invented a mechanical reaper that could be pulled by a horse. And could do the work of 10 men working with scythes. And then finally, by the 1900s, we got large mechanized machines that did both reaping and threshing together combined. And so it was called the combine harvester. You can see, one of these today. If the man with a scythe is kind of our standard unit of agricultural productivity, labor productivity. The mechanical reaper of the 1800s was about 10 times as productive, and the combine harvester, mechanized, with a gasoline-driven motor that was invented in the 1900s, is about 100 times as productive as a man. So imagine a huge swath that's like the width of 10 men with scythes, and the whole thing is moving forward 10 times faster than somebody with a scythe can walk. And so you've got 100 times, doing the work of 100 men. If you put all this together, better fertilizer and better varieties of crops that we bred gave us about 10 times a productivity improvement in crop yields. That is how many crops we could grow on a plot of land. And mechanization gave us more than 100 times, more like a 200 times improvement in how much land area one worker could do. And so when you multiply those things together, the total amount of crops we can grow per worker is about 2,000 times bigger today than in the earliest, most primitive agriculture. That's an enormous improvement. It means not everybody has to be farmers anymore. The proportion of the workforce that's, farmers has dropped from like, half to three quarters all the way down today to like, a few percent. In the US, I think it's just over 1%. And 1%, of the population can feed everybody else. Famine has also been eliminated from most of the world. There have been no major famines in the Americas since 1900, in the Middle East since 1920, in Europe since 1950, in Asia since 2000. Really, famine today is confined to the absolute poorest parts of the world, and it's mostly really a political problem, much more than a technological one. Okay, that was feeding ourselves. Grand challenge number 2 that I want to talk about is getting around. This is a map that was made in 1914, so just over a century ago. And what it shows is how far can you get starting from London, which is right kind of in the center of this red area on the map. Starting from London, how far could you get in a certain amount of time? So the red area here is how far can you get in 5 days? You can see it took, within 5 days of travel, 5 solid days. Now, think about this, right? Traveling for 5 days, you could get to most of Europe. If you wanted to get to America from London, it took, something like 10 or 20 days. And if you wanted to get to, the middle of the African jungle or the South American rainforests or Mongolia or the Australian outback, that would take well over a solid month of travel, right? Every day just doing nothing but traveling. And this, by the way, was in 1914, we had railroads and steamboats. So this was, before those things, travel was even slower. It could take you 2 months just to get across the Atlantic Ocean. Similar map for in 1800, before the railroads were built in America. This is how far you could get starting from New York City. It took you like a week just to get to Eastern Pennsylvania, or Western Pennsylvania rather, or to North Carolina. It took you like a month to get to New Orleans. So again, a solid month of travel just to go from New York to New Orleans. Travel sucked. It was really terrible experience. There was no such thing as pleasure travel. Travel was very slow. It was uncomfortable. You didn't have heated or air conditioned cabs. You didn't have shock absorbers. It was very bumpy. Roads were not paved. Ships were not very large and they would heave and roll in the ocean. It was dangerous. You could be lost at sea in a storm. Roads could be washed out in rain. So your travel was really at the mercy of weather. This was also, by the way, the speed of communication, because this was before the internet, before radio, television, even the telegraph. There were no electronic communications. So if you wanted to get a message to anybody, it could take a month to get there or longer, depending on how far it was going. Really, the main problem, if you step back and look at it, is that transportation was not yet motorized. We were still on, even when we, okay, in the first of those maps we had steamboats and railroads, but in the second map we didn't even have those things hadn't even been invented. So we're really traveling by horse and wagon or by sailing ship. In order to fix that problem, we first had to invent the motor. The first really kind of motor or engine was based on steam, the steam engine. But the very first steam engines couldn't be used for transportation because they were enormous. They were big and heavy. They were basically the size of a small building. This is a picture I took of one in the London Science Museum of one of the very first steam engines. In fact, there were early failed attempts to make a sort of locomotive machine because the boiler of the steam engine was just too enormous, was part of the problem. So to make powered transport, we really had to make engines smaller. In technical terms, we had to increase the power to weight ratio of the engine so that we could get, for a given amount of power, the engine could be smaller and lighter. For steam engines, we had to do this using high pressure steam, not low pressure engines, which were the first engines. High pressure steam was thought to be dangerous, and it was, but that was a risk that we had to take and manage in order to get something like the locomotive. In order to make the engines even smaller, to get something like the automobile, we needed to invent an entirely different type of engine, the internal combustion engine, which, by the way, could not run on wood and coal like the steam engines did. It needed to run on a refined liquid fuel like gasoline. So we had to invent the entire oil industry as well. But these engines allowed us to create powered transport. The steam engine gave us railroads and steamboats. The internal combustion engine gave us the automobile and the airplane. Each of these had their own set of mechanical challenges that had to be solved. I'm only going to give you a few glimpses, a few highlights of the many, many mechanical problems that had to be solved. For railroads, one of the biggest problems was just getting up enough steam, delivering enough steam fast enough, to boiling the water super fast in order to deliver enough power. In order to do this, one of the early railroad engineers invented something called the multi-tubular boiler. So this picture here, the big canister you're seeing is a boiler that held water to be boiled. And the pipes that go through it, you see there's like a couple of dozen pipes here. The hot gases from the fire flowed through those pipes and heated up the water. Initially, there was just one big pipe that went through the boiler. Why would you go, think about this, why would you go to many small pipes? Think for a few seconds and see if you can think of the answer. The answer is that what you want to do is to maximize the surface area of contact in between the pipes and the water. And having many small pipes maximizes the surface area and therefore maximizes the heat transfer, which is proportional to the surface area in contact between the hot gases and the water. For automobiles, one of the key challenges was that when a four-wheeled vehicle turns, the wheels have to turn actually different amounts. The inner wheel is traveling on a smaller circle than the outer wheel, and so it has to turn more. The device that does this is an ingenious mechanical device called the Ackermann linkage. And you can see here this low-res animated GIF, kind of how it works. I encourage you to look this up, the Ackermann linkage, and just sort of like look at how it works and kind of watch this animation for a while, because it's super cool. Even cooler, in my opinion, is a device called the differential, which I don't have time to explain, but I just encourage you to look it up. It's an ingenious little mechanical device with gears that intersect at 90-degree angles that allows the motor to deliver power to the wheels even when they're turning at different speeds. Truly amazing in how simple it is for the job that it performs. For flight, you might know that the Wright brothers, Orville and Wilbur Wright, invented the first airplane. This is one of them flying their initial glider. The main problem they had to solve was the control problem. How do you control a plane when it's in the air and prevent it from rolling and pitching and crashing? In order to do this, they invented a system called wing warping, where they would literally tie cords to the frame of their plane, which was made from like wood and canvas. And then they would pull on the cords in order to literally twist the wings and change the aerodynamics of it in order to turn. Today, we do this through flaps, ailerons. But the Wright brothers did it by literally warping the frame of their airplane. So let's go back to this map. Again, this red area is where you could get, starting from London within 5 days. Well, somebody updated this map about a century later. And this is what it looks like. Now, this map has to use a completely different scale, because if it didn't, the entire map, the entire world would be red. You can get anywhere in the world in well under 5 days now. The red area here represents half a day, 1/10 as much time. So again, you can get to all of Europe within half a day now. And you can get pretty much anywhere on the globe between any two cities, at least within about 24 hours. The only place, if you're starting from London, the only places that are more than 24 hours are places like, the Australian outback or, Siberia, or, the Sahara Desert, really remote places like that. And here's a similar map for the United States, starting from New York City on the right side of the map. How far could you get in one day? In 1800, very little. In 1830, not much more. By 1857, when we had the railroads, you could get to all of New England. By 1930, you could get farther by train, and you could get to most of the country by air. By 1934, you could get to the entire country by air. So we've really come a very long way in terms of transportation speeds. What this means is transportation speeds, faster transportation has really literally expanded our horizons. Think of all the things that is made possible: foreign vacations, international business deals, long distance relationships, getting fresh produce year round as we source it from, fruits and vegetables from places where they're grown to places where they can't grow. Major league sports, where teams actually, travel by air to play each other. Concerts that go on world tour. All of these things were basically unknown before we had powered transportation. So it's really transformed our world, uniting it into what's been called the global village. Okay, grand challenge number 3 is how we keep safe from disease. Again, this is one of these things that we don't appreciate how far we've come because we don't see how bad things used to be. Um, but plagues and epidemics used to happen all the time. They recur constantly throughout all of recorded history. Tuberculosis, cholera, smallpox, malaria, so many really terrible diseases. People didn't even always know what the disease was that was spreading through, but it was killing people. This painting was done in, I think, the 1600s, after a wave of Black Plague had swept through Europe. In the 1300s, I believe it was, the plague killed some 30 to 50% of Europe. Just imagine that, like almost half the country gone, dying from the plague. This is how people felt about it. This painting is titled The Triumph of Death. Unlike modern diseases like cancer, disease could strike anyone, anytime, anywhere, and kill you within days. If you get a cancer diagnosis today, you could be dead within months or years. If you came down with malaria, you could be dead within days. So many famous people, died in the middle of their life, in the prime of their life, from disease. Wilbur Wright, again, inventor of the airplane, died at age 45 from typhoid fever. John Keats, the famous English poet, died at 25 from tuberculosis. These are just a couple I could remember off the top of my head. There are many, many more. Um, it struck rich and poor. That kings and aristocrats were not immune. They got just almost as much disease as anybody. It struck men and women, healthy and frail. You could be in the prime of health and be struck down dead. Young and old, especially the young. Infants and children were particularly susceptible to disease. They were vulnerable because their immune system, they hadn't been through it. Their immune system hadn't built up all the antibodies yet, and the T cells. And so what this means is, through most of history, the mortality rate on children and infants was 50%. Half of newborns generally would not make it to adulthood. Now, think about what this means. Every parent, and most parents had multiple children, every parent would lose multiple children, would see their children die before reaching adulthood. And every child growing up probably lost a sibling or two. And people just took this for granted. Until, look at the very right side of that chart. The child mortality rate absolutely plummets in the last century or so. And today it is extremely low. Here's another way of looking at the same chart. Looks like somebody added an annotation on the chart. I don't know how you did that, Nivu. Maybe you can erase that. Look at these lines. So this line in 1851 shows that you can see right after birth, the survival rate plummets right away. Very dangerous the first few years of life. And even after that, in the middle of life, it's not that hot. We improved and improved this over the decades until this last line basically represents today. And you can see there is no longer a plummeting in the early years of life. Pretty much everybody gets to live till at least age 50 or 60, and many people, into their 80s. How did we do it? This is a triumph of human history. How did we achieve this? Well, we set up 3 lines of defense against infectious disease: sanitation, cleaning up germs in our environment; vaccines, immunizing ourselves and boosting our immune system; and then antibiotics, drugs that work inside the body to fight disease. Really, all of this was enabled by the germ theory. It got started before the germ theory, but it really got going and could make a lot of progress after we learned that many diseases are caused by small germs, living organisms entering the body from the outside and then replicating inside the body and then spreading to other people. So the first stage was to clean up our environment. Water sanitation, cleaning up the water that we drink and use to cook, filtering it and using chemicals to kill germs in it, so that we're and also treating sewer water, sewage, and then carefully getting rid of it and making sure that it doesn't contaminate the drinking water, so that we're not basically drinking from the toilet. Food handling, better food handling practices. Milk used to be transported warm in open containers. It was a literal breeding ground for bacteria. And then, of course, it would be fed to babies. Meat packing and meat handling also was done in really filthy environments. Pest control, especially insects and especially mosquitoes, which are vectors for disease like malaria or yellow fever. And domestic hygiene, just learning to wash our hands, wash our cooking implements, and try to keep things clean around the house. This is a depiction, a painting of a meatpacking plant in the early 1900s. They were absolutely filthy. This is an advertisement trying to convince parents at home to be careful about flies, kill the fly and save the child. There needed to be whole public education campaigns to let people know that bugs carry disease. Even against spitting, this is another public health campaign. Spitting spreads disease. Don't spit in the streets, basically. People had to be taught this stuff. Um, okay, the second line of defense was immunity, boosting our own immune systems, and this is mostly a story of vaccines. Where this all started was with the terrible disease of smallpox, really awful disease that causes like these pustules all over your skin and face and body, and even inside your mouth and throat. Very deadly. You had about a 1 in 3 to 1 in 6 chance of dying if you got this. And yet most people caught it, especially in big cities. And so what would actually happen is people would deliberately give smallpox to themselves and to their children in order to just get it over with and have immunity for life. Because once you got it, you would never get it again. And the reason that they could do this was because there was a way to give yourself smallpox by pricking the skin that made it less deadly than kind of catching it the natural way through the air. But it was still very dangerous. I mean, by modern standards to do this. So in the late 1700s, there was this innovation, which is somebody realized that if you got cowpox, it would also give you immunity to smallpox. And cowpox was a much more mild disease that was not deadly. And so instead of pricking people's skin with smallpox virus, they started pricking them with cowpox instead. This was the origins of vaccination. But it wasn't for another 100 years until after the germ theory was developed that we were able to make vaccines for any other diseases. In the late 1800s, we developed methods to basically weaken or kill germs in order to turn them into vaccines. Once you weaken or kill a germ, you can put it into somebody's body, and then their immune system can learn to recognize it without them actually catching the disease because the germ has been inactivated. In the 1900s, we used these techniques to make vaccines for many more diseases, and we came up with even more techniques to make vaccines even safer. Finally, by the 1970s, vaccination against smallpox in particular was so successful that we completely eradicated smallpox. Smallpox is now extinct. We wiped it off the face of the earth. There have been literally no cases of smallpox from in the wild for something like 40 years. It's gone. And many other diseases were basically eliminated through vaccines. Okay, finally, antibiotics. You may have heard the story of penicillin, one of the first antibiotics, which was discovered by accident based on when some mold started growing in a petri dish of a researcher. This is what the dish looked like. The mold is that white spot at the top, and you can see the bacteria are kind of growing towards the bottom, but no bacteria were growing close to the mold. And so the researcher figured out, Fleming was his name, Alexander Fleming figured out that the mold was secreting some substance that was killing the bacteria or making it impossible for them to grow. It wasn't until more than 10 years later, though, that we learned to take the mold juice and turn it into an actual drug. It was a very tricky chemical engineering process to sort of take mold, figure out how to grow enough of the mold fast enough, and then how to extract and purify the drug penicillin out of the juice, especially since it's a very delicate chemical that degrades very easily. So finally, by the 1940s, some very talented biological and chemical engineers figured out how to do this, and we had penicillin. In the years after that, we started looking for antibiotics everywhere, in other kinds of mold, in the water, in the soil, We went to all kinds of places and just got every sample that we could get in order to try to find these sort of natural substances. And today we have so many different antibiotics that we can cure almost any bacterial infection, aside from a few drug-resistant ones. So it's really dramatically changed, what we can do. The developed world has now eliminated so many diseases: smallpox, tuberculosis, polio, cholera, malaria. These are all things that used to, that used to kill people, make them suffer. Polio would paralyze young children. So many terrible effects of these diseases. But these diseases are eliminated now from much of the world. And child death, which used to be a common occurrence, is now a rare tragedy. Okay, those were just three of some of the sort of greatest triumphs of humanity, but there are so many more that I could tell you about if we had more time. How we make things, the factory system that produces a high quantity of high quality goods at low price. How we create energy infrastructure to do work, to do physical labor for us that used to have to be done through backbreaking manual work. The communications infrastructure that allows us to communicate with anyone, anytime, anywhere in the world instantly, 24/7, basically for free. Truly amazing and did not exist even just a few decades ago. Our homes are far more comfortable now. A century ago, people did not have, in general, electricity, running water, toilets, bathrooms of any kind, no bathroom in the home, refrigerators, or any kind of refrigerated food, central heating and air conditioning, all of these things that we take for granted that would basically be considered basic necessities of living. You're in desperate poverty if you don't have electricity. Well, this was the norm just about 100 years ago, maybe a little more. If you look at the numbers, incomes as measured by GDP per person have increased more than 20 times in industrialized nations. Extreme poverty has been driven down dramatically. 200 years ago, the vast majority of the world lived in what today is considered extreme poverty. Now it's more like maybe 10% of the world. Because of our wealth, child labor has dramatically decreased. Children don't have to work anymore. And when they don't have to work, they can go to school. And because of this, world literacy rates have dramatically increased. 200 years ago, the vast majority of the world could not read or write. And today, most of the world, almost 90%, is literate. Life expectancy from diseases and conquering disease and from other health and nutrition. One of the most amazing facts about progress is that every country in the world today has a higher life expectancy at birth than any country in the world did in 1800. So the worst off regions today, places like Sierra Leone and Mozambique and Nigeria, still have a higher life expectancy at birth today than the wealthiest and most advanced places did, like in the 1800s, like Belgium, the Netherlands, and the USA. That's an amazing fact. All right, let's take a breath, because all of that is in the past. And of course, what we really want to know is, what about the future? Will this continue? Past performance, you may have heard, does not guarantee future results. Will progress inevitably slow down? Are we due for inevitable stagnation? Did we just get lucky these last few hundred years with all this improvement in quality of living? Is there even more stuff out there to be discovered or invented? Well, let's do a little modeling and think about this mathematically. So here is GDP per capita in the United States over the last just over 100 years. So this is a measure of wealth or income. This is a pretty nice exponential curve with some bumps in it. We can tell that it's exponential because if we plot it on a log scale with a logarithmic y-axis, it basically turns into a straight line. And if you've studied exponential curves, you know that when you plot them with a logarithmic y-axis, they look like straight lines. So why might an economy grow exponentially? Well, I heard you like differential equations, so let's do some diffie-q. An exponential is the solution to what form of differential equation? Give you a sec to think about it. It's a very simple one that looks like this. Here I'm using the notation y prime to mean the first derivative of y. Y prime equals cy, where c is a constant. So this is the differential equation that gives you exponential growth. We can rewrite this, dividing both sides by y. We can say y prime over y equals c, a constant. Y prime over y is the growth rate expressed in as terms of a percentage or a fraction, right? And so basically we're saying a constant growth rate like 2% per year gets you exponential growth. So exponential economic growth, where does that come from? So again, exponential growth comes from when something is growing in proportion to its size. So you might, know that if you have a certain amount of money saved up and you invest that money at a constant percentage return, like, 2% per year, then and you keep reinvesting the dividends, then your savings will grow exponentially. Well, similarly, if an entire economy invests some fraction of its output into growth and can get a similar constant percent return, then the entire economy can grow exponentially. Okay, but now I want to zoom out in both space and time. We looked at the US for the last 100 plus years. This is GDP of the entire world for the last 2,000 years. Again, we see that nice upward sloping curve. And so you might think, aha, let's plot this one on a log scale as well. Well, haha, this graph is already on a log scale. Look at that y-axis. It's logarithmic already. And so we're not looking at a straight line here. We're looking at a line that bends upwards even on a log scale. What does that mean? It's not just exponential growth. World GDP over the last 2,000 years is actually super exponential. And by the way, if you look at per capita GDP or at population itself, they're also these super exponential curves, these lines that bend upwards on a log scale. Okay, what does super exponential growth mean? Well, it means that it grows faster than any exponential, right? An exponential would be a straight line, but these lines bend upwards. So this means we don't have a constant growth rate here. The growth rate actually increases over time. Sorry, once again, somebody's added some annotations lines to the graph. I don't know who you are, how you're doing that, but maybe you can erase it. Thanks. So the growth rate is not a constant. Schematically, economic growth in the Stone Age was roughly about, say, 0.02%. In the agricultural age, something more like 0.2%, about 10 times bigger. And in the industrial age, about even 10 times bigger than that, something like 2% per year. So that percentage growth rate is not a constant, it's increasing over time. So if we go back to our differential equation, this means that y prime over y, instead of being equal to c, a constant, is equal to some function of y itself, some increasing function of y, such that the growth gets faster as we make more progress. Why might that happen? Well, you get constant growth in a model where the mechanism of growth itself is independent of scale. So this happens, for instance, in a biological population, a population of animals that are growing, because the mechanism of growth is the reproductive mechanism of the individual organism. It's a mother, getting pregnant and having babies. And that does not change with a large population. It's still the same basic mechanism. It's also true of an economy in the short run, like the US over the last 100 years through kind of the industrial age. The mechanism of growth is fundamentally kind of unchanged through that period. But it's not true of an economy and of humanity over the long run, because over the long run, there are enough fundamental inventions and developments that the very mode of production itself changes. From hunting and gathering in the Stone Age to agriculture and crafts in the Middle Ages and the ancient world to industry and mechanization and energy and power today. So progress actually changes the mode of production. Think of all the things today that contribute to progress that are different from the past. Today, we have more researchers working on science and invention. We have more investment in research and development. We have more scientific knowledge as a base for technology. We have better instruments and computers, which themselves drive science forward faster. We have better communication technologies to record and share ideas. We have financial institutions like venture capital that can fund new ventures to get started. All of these things contribute to faster progress. And so the basic lesson, if you remember two words out of this entire talk, well, this is what I want you to remember. Progress compounds. Progress builds on itself. Progress begets progress. And so it creates a feedback loop wherein progress accelerates. That equation I wrote, y prime over y equals f of y, means that the growth rate is a function of how much progress we've made so far. The more progress we make, the bigger the economy we have and the better infrastructure we have, and that means faster growth. And because of that, I expect not only that we won't stagnate over the long term, but I expect that progress will keep accelerating. Okay, if this is true, what can you do to help? How can you play a part in this story? Well, I hope I've convinced you that there is more progress to be made and inspired you, motivated you to actually do that. So let's look at where it might come from, and if you want to participate, what you should do. We're going to look at just a few high opportunity spaces on the frontier of technology, things that I think are going to be big in the coming decades. I can't be comprehensive here, but I want to focus on three big ones, and it's biology and biotech, artificial intelligence, and energy. Let's take them one by one. Opportunity number one is bio. Even with the progress against infectious disease that I talked about, there is so much left to do. We still die of so many things: strokes, heart attacks, Alzheimer's, and other neurodegenerative diseases, cancer. You can look up on Our World in Data, which is the source for several charts I've shown you already. The causes of death, this is the causes of death from 2019, just before COVID. You can see cardiovascular disease, cancer, respiratory diseases, dementia, etc. The list goes on. Many problems to solve. Cancer in particular is a difficult problem. And I think about it like this compared to some of the infectious diseases. When you're fighting bacteria, you are fighting cells that have a very, very different biology from human cells. Bacteria diverged from human cells, a billion or more years ago in the evolutionary history. And so you can easily find chemicals that kill bacteria but don't kill our own cells, and so they're safe to put in the body. When you're fighting a virus, now you're fighting something that actually takes advantage of our own cells. It uses human cells to replicate. And so interfering with those processes without interfering with human cells and damaging them is very difficult. And to this day, we don't have effective broad spectrum antiviral drugs that can combat viruses as easily as we combat bacteria. That's why all the big pandemics, like flu and COVID, they're all viral pandemics, not bacterial, because we have antibiotics. The challenge with cancer is that it actually is our own cells. It's just our own cells with a genetic mutation. And so trying to find something like a drug that kills cancer cells but doesn't kill the rest of our cells is extremely difficult because they're so similar. This is why when you take chemotherapy, it's actually to cure cancer, it's actually has very bad side effects because it's toxic to your own cells as well. It's just a little bit more toxic to the cancer. The ultimate solution to cancer, I don't know what it is, but there's a plausible story that it lies in genetic engineering because cancer ultimately is a problem of genetic mutation. And so genetic engineering, I expect to have. I mean, it has already had many applications, not just to cancer. We use genetic engineering to make synthetic insulin and all sorts of other proteins to make vaccines, the mRNA vaccines for COVID, to make antibody therapies, to create better crops that are resistant to insects or to herbicides, et cetera, et cetera. This is just a small sort of glimpse of what genetic engineering has already done for us. And yet, I feel that it's still the early days of genetic engineering. It was only within the last, 10, 20 years that we invented CRISPR, which is a new tool for doing genetic editing that makes it much easier to do experiments. And that's really accelerating the science of genomics. We still have very few treatments that have been approved for genetic diseases. There are a couple, but it's early days for this stuff. In the future of biotechnology, we might be able to, genetically engineer even better crops, more efficient, robust, and nutritious. We might be able to give ourselves optimal health, optimal strength, energy, and mental focus. We might be able to cure not just all cancer, but all of disease and give ourselves perfect health. In fact, I think we can go even further than that. I think we can cure aging itself and give ourselves a much greater lifespan. There is no reason that human lifespan has to be inherently limited to just about 100 years. We are already starting to understand, or on the cusp of understanding, some of the basic science of how cells age and tissues and organs. And I believe that at some point, I don't know when, everyone will be able to live as long as they want to in perfect health. And that will be an amazing day. It might even happen within your lifetime. If I'm lucky, it'll happen within my lifetime. But all of this is more likely if you go and work on it. And so I want to encourage you to do that. Now, one of the reasons that I'm optimistic about bio is because of the second thing I want to talk about, which is AI. So first, let's talk about AI for science, for research and development. So biotech is about to get a major boost from AI. Researchers are already training AI models on genomes and to learn its patterns. They're creating AI research assistants that can do literature review and other types of tasks. And it's not just biology. AI, I believe, will advance research and development and science across every field. But AI can do many other things for us as well. It can give us, there can be AI doctors and lawyers and psychologists giving these services that are today are expensive and making them cheap and affordable to everybody, to people who can't afford the best doctors and lawyers today. It will greatly magnify human creativity. Any idea you have for art, for music, for an entire film that you want to see, if it's just an idea in your mind, you will be able to realize it, to make it real through AI tools. Um, Anyone who with a business idea will be able to be a CEO and spin up a virtual team of software engineers, product managers, designers, sales representatives, customer support. Um, all of those things you'll be able to just sort of spin up an AI team. In education, AI will mean a personal tutor for everyone and everybody being able to access personalized, high quality education. It may help us to finally solve the remaining problems in robotics and create robots that navigate and understand the world as well as people do, being able to, finally take over the last human tasks. So AI, I think, could have a transformative effect on the economy. AI could be for mental labor what the Industrial Revolution was for physical labor. And so, today, if you just look at energy as a usage as a proxy, the energy used by our infrastructure and machines is about 100 times the energy used by the human body. This is like every person on Earth having, or at least in America, every one of us having like 100 mechanical servants to do work for us. Well, imagine we got the same ratio to AI, an AI to human ratio of 100 to 1. That would be like every person adding 100 professional servants to just help them in their life and work day and night. This is the kind of thing that can cause acceleration and bend that curve upwards. But there's one crucial thing that AI is going to need, one resource or input, maybe more than one, but there's one that I'm going to talk about now, which is our final area of opportunity, and that's energy. We're going to need a lot more energy, not just for AI. AI is very power hungry, but energy is really fundamental to the economy. Absolutely everything in the economy, everything in our lives is driven by energy. Now, we saw a hint of this when we talked about transportation, how central it was to create motors and engines. And also when we looked at agriculture and we saw how agriculture benefited from being mechanized by large machines like the combine harvester, which are driven by gasoline. But just broadly, energy usage is strongly correlated with GDP. Having a good life requires energy. Here's a scatter plot of GDP per capita on the x-axis on a log scale, and then energy usage per capita on the y-axis, also on a log scale. And you can see that there's a very tight relationship here. There are no wealthy countries that don't use a lot of energy per person. Now, in what I believe to be a tragedy of our age, energy consumption per capita in the United States flatlined around 1970. It was on an increasing trajectory for about 150 years. And then since 1970, we have not used any more really energy per person. And I think we need to increase this again in order to continue improving our quality of life. We need more energy. We should be aiming for energy that is extremely cheap, trending towards 1 cent per kilowatt hour, which is less than anybody pays for energy today by a good margin. We need our energy sources to be abundant. There needs to be lots and lots of energy. We should be thinking of things in terms of terawatts, because 10 terawatts is order of magnitude the energy consumption that we should be aiming for humanity. That's actually roughly, I think, within an order of magnitude of the primary energy consumption of the world today. It needs to be reliable because we need energy 24/7, 365, absolutely all the time, day and night, year round. And of course, it needs to be clean, ultimately trending towards net zero CO2. What's some energy sources that can do this? Well, one promising one is solar. It's abundant because the amount of solar energy reaching Earth is well over 100 petawatts. That is 100,000 terawatts. So that's more than 10 to the fourth times total, current world energy usage. There's plenty of energy coming here. It has the potential to be cheap because the prices of solar photovoltaic cells are dropping very rapidly, as I'll show you in a moment. Unfortunately, it's not 24/7 reliable. We can't generate it at night, and it can also be blocked by clouds. Now, batteries can solve this reliability problem if you build enough of them, but batteries increase the cost. And so one thing we need is better batteries. Another potential solution is using solar energy to do hydrocarbon synthesis. That is to create hydrocarbon fuels that are chemically equivalent to fossil fuels like oil and gas, but that are being synthesized from the carbon in the atmosphere and therefore are net zero. So here's a graph of what has happened to solar photovoltaic cell prices. On the left is a module cost in dollars per watt adjusted for inflation. And then on the x-axis is actually, it's not time, it is the cumulative installed capacity. So it's how much solar we have built. And both of these are on a log plot, so we're on a log scale. So we're looking at a power law here, where every time we double solar capacity that we've built, the cost of solar decreases, as I recall, by about 25%. So it just keeps coming down and down. Another promising nuclear technology is fission, nuclear fission. It is also abundant because nuclear fuel like uranium or thorium is it's insanely dense. The density of this fuel is like 1 million times that of hydrocarbons. And so you only need a tiny amount of it in order to power the world. It's reliable, 24/7, 365. Nuclear plants function all the time. It is not particularly cheap today, but I believe that that is not for physics and engineering reasons, but more for sort of social and legal and regulatory reasons. So I think we fundamentally need regulatory reform. And there are several startups that are working to make nuclear cheap, even in today's environment, places like Last Energy or Oklo. And so encourage you to check those out. Just a few other energy sources that I'll throw out here that I'm interested in. One is fusion, which there are a few companies pioneering today and which I expect could be viable for commercial generation within 5 years. And then there's geothermal, using the heat of the earth to generate energy, which historically has been confined to a few places that have like volcanoes where the heat comes to the surface. But with deep enough drilling techniques, you can get heat anywhere. And so geothermal is another potentially a very interesting source of energy. Okay, I've been talking for a while, so let me wrap up. I've painted a picture for you of a bold, ambitious future. And I hope it is one that you want to live in and are motivated to build. But my message here is not one of complacency. The future is not going to deliver itself. It's only going to happen if people go out there and build it. And you can play a part in this. Not only accelerating the future, but the other thing you get to do if you help to drive the future is to steer it to good outcomes. So I hope it inspired you to think about an ambitious future for humanity and to maybe play a part in it when you graduate. And so go out there and build. And if you want more stuff like this, I encourage you to check out rootsofprogress.org and my writings at the Roots of Progress newsletter. Okay, thank you very much. I'll leave this up a little bit, and then I'm happy to use our remaining time to take some questions.
Yeah, well, thank you very much for a fascinating talk. And yeah, please ask questions. I guess Jason will be following the chat now. Is that right?
Yeah, sure. Go ahead and put them in the chat if you want, or you can use the raise hand feature and I'll call on people and you can just unmute yourselves. Okay, Abdur, go ahead.
Yeah, you said that we could use AI, so like, for the future, do our part. Would you say using AI is like to first like to invest in learning machine learning, like do that at university, or
Um,
just taking your free time just to like learn how it works and then I don't know, making like let's say a tutoring AI.
Yeah, totally. I mean, I think everybody should be figuring out how to use AI in your life and work. For me, I have enjoyed using it recently as a reading companion. So when I'm reading a book, questions will pop into my head, and I'll either maybe there's something unclear in the book, or there's just like a tangent that I want to go off, and I'll just open up ChatGPT or Claude and just start asking it my questions. Um, I also like going to AI now as just kind of like a basic tutor on if I just want to start learning a topic. Recently, I was interested in learning about um, the history of air pollution, especially from automobiles, and the catalytic converter, which is a device that is now installed on automobiles to clean up the emissions so that it doesn't cause smog. And so I just went to ChatGPT and started asking it questions. Hey, what was the problem with smog in the 1970s? What does smog consist of? What were the components of it? What is a catalytic converter? How does it work? And so on and so forth. And it kind of gave me all the basics. And that was like a great, just sort of intro. Um, if you, I definitely, if you're interested in this stuff, definitely recommend teaching yourself about the basics of machine learning and AI. There are so many resources out there, and it's very accessible. If you have access to a computer, you can learn this stuff. Um, a couple places I would start. Andre Karpathy has some great videos teaching this, and the math channel 3Blue 1Brown did some really great stuff as well on neural networks. So those are just some starting points, but there are tons and tons of places you can learn, and and of course AI itself can help be a tutor in this. Okay, we have some questions in the chat, so I'll just start taking these. Um, Okay, one question is, what are some programs slash branches that are currently slash actively tackling the bio, AI, and energy? Okay, I'll only be able to name a few off the top of my head. So let's see. So in bio, I mean, there are all sorts of exciting biotech startups. I mentioned longevity in particular. So maybe I should name a couple of longevity companies. One interesting one that's going on right now is called Loyal. They are actually making longevity drugs for dogs. So they're trying to extend lifespan in dogs to start. And then they're hoping that they will find something that could then also be applied to humans. In the meantime, if we could extend the lifespan of dogs, people get more time with their pets. So that's sort of worth it in its own right. There's another company called RetroBio, which has raised a bunch of money and is doing all kinds of experiments as fast as they can. Gordian Biotech is another that some friends of mine work at, and they've been developing also better experimental techniques for testing out longevity therapies. So those are a couple just off the top of my head. In artificial intelligence, if you've been looking into the field, you probably know the names of some of the top AI labs like OpenAI, Anthropic, or Google has Google DeepMind and Google Brain. Um, so those are some of the top ones in AI right now. I would also recommend at the intersection of those, there's a fascinating organization called Future House, which is building AI tools for scientists. And then energy, let's see. For solar, I would recommend Terraform Industries, which is doing methane synthesis, hydrocarbon synthesis from solar energy, basically doing natural gas synthesis. Last Energy is an Oklo are the two nuclear companies that I mentioned. And let's see. In fusion, there's Helion and Commonwealth Fusion Systems are the sort of top two fusion companies that I know. And then for geothermal, the one that comes to mind is called Fervo Energy. So those are a couple names that you can go look up. Okay, let's see. Sai asks, what do you think needs to change fundamentally in education to better prepare people to work on solutions? Um, I think if you go to a good university for technical topics, you can get a pretty good technical education. I think a missing part is a little bit of what I have done here, which is just kind of painting this picture about how science and technology can advance humanity and what some of the opportunities are on the frontier. So I hope I've done a little bit here to plug the gap. And I think if you follow Roots of Progress newsletter and some of the folks that I link to in that newsletter and on Twitter, you can follow me on Twitter also, by the way. My handle is just Jason Crawford. And I think that will clue you in to more and more of these opportunities. Emma asks, what is the role of the humanities in all of this? How can they help in the future? Yeah, there's a crucial role for the humanities in making sense of what's going on in the world and helping us understand why we do what we do and why we're general audience. But those fields I think are crucial for understanding where we've been, who we are, and where we're going. And I think we need more study of the history and philosophy of progress itself. Economics also is crucial for understanding, how these things happen. And economics actually does mathematical modeling of how an economy grows, how science and technology advance, and there's lots of interesting work to be done in the economics of growth and in the economics of innovation and science. And in a discipline called meta science, which is the science of science, like how does science work? So definitely recommend looking those up as well. Siona asks, how do we change people's mind about fusion and fission given the past history? Okay, those are two pretty different challenges. So fission, the biggest challenge is that people think that nuclear power is dirty and dangerous, when in fact it is pretty clean and safe. How do we change people's mind? We just have to keep telling the story and telling the facts over and over. And I think more and more people are doing that. And so I applaud those efforts. I also think that if we just build it and show people that it's working and that it's helping, then that'll go a long way. In terms of fusion, the main thing is that a lot of people don't believe that it's ever going to actually work, and they won't be convinced until it works. But fortunately, some companies are building it now, and if they can actually succeed and get it working, then everybody will see that it's working. I think that's the basic answer there. Okay. Nivu asked me to share the names of the companies once more. Let me I'll just write them down for Simon, and maybe you can share it out through email. Okay. The next question, if we believe AI would have superhuman intelligence, what role would humans play in building for the future? Seems like we can't beat AI. Nobody knows the full answer to that question, but I like to think, and I would like us to build towards a world in which humans are not entirely disintermediated by AI and lose all agency. I want a future where humans are still playing an active part, and I think that's the future we should work towards. AI should be a tool, maybe even a companion, maybe a co-worker or co-creator. AI should magnify our powers, but it should be an extension of human agency rather than a replacement for human agency. And so I think AI should just greatly magnify our ability to build things. And ultimately, maybe if people don't want to play much of a role in the future, and maybe it will turn out that the majority of humanity doesn't want to if they don't have to, maybe they will spend most of their lives playing games and having fun and exploring. And there are sci-fi novels that sort of depict a world in which people basically don't have anything to do anymore except play games and entertain themselves. I sort of think that some minority of humanity will always want to work, and they will always have some creative or productive endeavor that they're pursuing, even if only kind of, for its own sake. That's just my belief about human nature. Okay. Mirren asks, can the population decline slow down humanity's development rate in the future? Yes, I believe so. So I didn't address this, but I think part of what has driven greater progress is a larger population over time. Larger population fundamentally. So I wrote a whole essay on this. I incorporated it into the book that I'm writing called The Techno-Humanist Manifesto. You can find it on my blog. I wrote the essay. If you want to just find the essay alone, it's somewhere on my blog titled something like Why You Personally Should Want a Larger Population. And it's about all of the benefits to everyone, to every individual of a larger, human population. And part of the answer is that I think there are multiple ways that this accelerates progress. And there are economic growth models to back this up. But what some of you might know is that population growth has actually been decelerating for the last 50 years. And in fact, we are heading towards a world in which population peaks and perhaps declines. So I do think that is worrisome. I think if there's a lot of problems that could be created by a shrinking population. I think we at least want to stabilize it. Um, but I think that there will be ways that we can get the population to grow again with greater wealth and technology, is the short answer. Okay. Um, Conrad says, you seem to conflate modernity, technological innovation, and progress, but humans have never learned how to transcend major human problems like wars and climate change. If AI is so energy hungry, how can we sustain its exponential growth? Will AI somehow learn how to alleviate all the problems that may trail in its wake? Um, First, again, I'll refer you to some essays I've written on this. I wrote an essay called What is Progress, which talks about different types of progress, like technological progress, industrial progress, moral and social progress, and human progress. And what is the relationship between all those things? So I don't conflate them, but I do ultimately believe, and I know this is controversial, not everybody will agree, but I do ultimately believe that all forms of progress go together, and that ultimately scientific, technological, and industrial progress help to promote human well-being and human progress. But they don't travel in lockstep, and they are not equivalent. So we do have to carefully steer material progress in technology and science and industry in order to make sure that it creates good futures for humanity. Absolutely. You say humans have never learned how to transcend major human problems like wars and climate change. I don't think that's true. Um, I think we have transcended many human problems. So I didn't include this in the talk, but 250 years ago, pretty much the entire world lived under some form of monarchy. There was no democracy to speak of anywhere. Slavery was common, and women were second-class citizens without full rights. In most of the world today, those problems have been solved. Now, the majority of the world, I believe, lives under a democracy. Slavery has been legally, formally eliminated. If slavery is illegal in pretty much every part of the world, um, and women have equal rights in many parts of the world. So those are three major problems which were not solved for thousands and thousands of years. And again, in the last couple hundred years, we solved. Now, there are many human problems remaining, many problems of rights and of society and of government. But I believe that we can overcome social and moral problems as well as technological and scientific ones. Um, and the two ultimately go together and can help reinforce each other, although, again, one doesn't automatically lead to the other. Even war and violence, the overall level of violence has greatly declined through human history. And I would direct you to the book "The Better Angels of Our Nature" by Steven Pinker as kind of the canonical reference on this. If you don't want to read, it's like an 800-page book. If you don't want to read it, I did a book review of it, as I recall. You can find that on my blog. Um, Climate change, I also believe, is a solvable problem through clean energy, through carbon capture technologies, and ultimately probably through solar radiation management. And ultimately through adaptations in agriculture, possibly if necessary, building seawalls around our cities. But I do believe that we're going to be able to deal with it. That's a whole separate talk that I would have to give to convince you of that. I don't blame you if you're not convinced right now. You say if AI is so energy hungry, how can we sustain exponential growth? I mean, the bottom line is by continually exponentially growing the availability, the abundance, and the cost, reducing the cost of energy, which is what we've done through most of human history, and there are clear ways to do it through solar and nuclear going forward. Will AI somehow learn how to alleviate all the problems that may trail in its wake? Well, I think not automatically, but I think we can learn how to alleviate those problems, and we can use AI to leverage our powers of problem solving in order to do that. Okay, so Conrad counters, these gains are fragile. Women are losing reproductive rights. Human trafficking is still a contemporary problem. Sometimes we take two steps forward and one step back. But I think if you study the long history of human progress, even social and moral progress, you will find that we have come a long way. And that even if it's not an absolute ratchet, even if we can regress sometimes, the overall trend, as one famous orator said, the arc of the moral arc of the universe is long, but it bends towards justice. I think that is fundamentally true. Again, it doesn't happen automatically or on its own. It happens through the work of activists and philosophers and historians and sociologists and politicians and human rights workers. All of these people make it happen. It doesn't happen sort of on its own. But they have, I believe, made it happen throughout history. And I think we're in a much better place today than we were even a few hundred, let alone a few thousand years ago. So encourage you to study history to become more to feel more of a sense of agency that we can actually solve those problems. Thank you for asking. Those are important questions. Okay.
Okay. Any more questions? Well, if not, let's thank Jason again for a wonderful talk and discussion.
Thank you very much. Thanks all for being here and listening and asking good questions. Really appreciate it. And I hope I've given you some great food for thought. Again, go check out rootsofprogress.org or look me up on Twitter at Jason Crawford. And I'll see you on the internet. So long, everybody.
Bye.